Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sam Waltman. I'm a recently graduated senior of Dickinson College. I majored in history and educational studies. As you said, gracious to introduce the project. I was involved in a public history course taught at Dickinson, uh, in which we completed a project where we looked into the history of the police department, the police force in Cumberland County region. This was a effort supported by Dickinson, the Carlisle Cumberland County Historical Society, as well as a number of Dickinson students working in conjunction with the police force in order to produce a number of posters that will be available for public, what I think public use and consumption. Professor Ball, who is the professor of the course, is also on the call at the moment. So what I tried to do was synthesize a bunch of our research together. We had originally created a timeline just to help people understand where the police force in Carlisle had come from and where it is going and where it is right now. So Carlisle used to be a frontier community, way out here in Pennsylvania. As hard as that is to imagine today, it used to be out on the fringes. So before that, there wasn't a police force. The police force is something that grew with Carlisle. It's almost a reflection of Carlisle itself. So before 1860, what you actually had were things called constables and night watches. A constable wasn't actually what you'd consider a police officer. It was more of an officer of the court. So someone who would go out, serve summons. They couldn't arrest anyone unless they actively saw you committing a crime. And a night watch was something that the town voted and put together in times of need. So during events like the Civil War, they would vote to bring a night watch together to kind of patrol the town and make sure keep the peace. But unlike a police force, night watch would disband after a certain amount of time. This was fine when Carlisle was a small hamlet out on the fringes, but as Carlisle industrialized and became bigger, the town felt like there was more of a need for a police force. And in 1867, they moved to do just that. The Carlisle Borough Council was gracious enough for me. I worked with the Cumberland County Historical Society actually earlier to give me access to the borough logbooks. You can go, they're all there. Bound together, and you can see the 1867 ordinance for the appointment of a police force. So the Carlisle Borough Council made a ordinance that appointed around 4 people and a chief of police, which a chief burgess, who was at the time the same as the head constable, in order to more readily patrol the area. And this was a little bit short-lived because actually a few years later they decided to disband the police force, but then they brought it back after a series of riots. So the police force isn't something that you kind of take for granted, or you do take for granted, but there was actually this long confrontation over whether Carlisle should have a police force or not. The police did what we expect police to do today. It was a patrol unit. So they would go out and patrol, walk the community, and if they saw crimes occurring, they would arrest the person. The first arrest was actually made in 1887. A farmer from South Middleton came to Carlisle and was a bit too well served and was causing a ruckus, and police officer came and arrested him. So it actually took a little bit of time for the first arrest to be made, or at least the first recorded arrest to be made. You know, the great thing about the Cumberland County Historical Society is that they kept a lot of these logs and minutes, and Randy Watts, a local historian, has written a book with this, and there's all sorts of great tidbits of information that you can assume, but it's great to have that historical record and see. So I was glad that I got to work with this archival information and finding this stuff. So one of the key points that the Carlisle Police Department wanted us to get across, or what was important to them when we went and talked to them, was the death of Officer George H. Martin. So Officer George H. Martin is so far the only Carlisle police officer to have died on the line of duty. I don't know if that's changed since I put together the poster. I hope not. But he fell after patrolling. He kind of went after a known criminal. And there's a little bit of confusion about what happens, but he was shot on the line of duty. He is commemorated in a number of different places. I noticed it when you walk into the police station. There's actually a great little plaque memorial to him. But I think it's really interesting that only one police officer has fallen, but something that Chief Landis really wanted to stress to us when we came in is that they feel like this is part of the history and that it's something really important, and that Officer George H. Martin is someone that is going to be remembered. And, you know, once a Carlisle police officer, he is still one today. So as the police force became more organized, as Carlisle grew, the responsibilities, the funding, the organization, and the technology involved in policing the Carlisle community also grew as well. So at the turn of the century in 1903, the chief of police at the time decided that they were going to start monitoring cars. They were going to start registering cars. And again, this is something we really take for granted in law enforcement, but at the time, only 6 cars registered in Carlisle. And, you know, today cars are such a central part of the Cumberland County identity, not just with the interstates, but also with the car shows. So it's interesting to think that there was a time where for policing, this was a novel idea and something they had to adjust to. So thinking about that, I think that's something that is great about history, is it allows you to contextualize our present situation using the past. And just like how in the past, they had to respond and adapt and overcome this issue of what to do about automobiles, today the police force is facing new issues and new things that they have to adjust to as well. Well, you can see these yellow questions that I've added into the document. This is an attempt to try to kind of spur conversation about what the police means in the community to them. So it's an educational tool that I hope will kind of help people connect the history of the Carlisle police force to today, because a lot of these questions, again, are things that people have to deal with today. So then 1941, a bit of a jump, things happened in between, but Carlisle had grown to a fairly decent size. So from a hamlet on the frontier to really a town. And the police force needed to professionalize at this point, because before it was by appointment. So there was a lot of political infighting about who gets to be a police officer, what is a police officer. But in 1941, standards were put in place in order to ensure that the people who were becoming police were appropriately suited for the job, a civil service. And there's a whole, and you know, the civil service still exists for the police today. There's still requirements. So again, interesting to think that there was a time where how we hired government employees and how we hired law enforcement was different than today, when maybe there's a bit more training and requirements involved. So the first poster, this is the end of the first poster, was designed at showing the growth of the police force from the frontier community to a town. And there's another poster into the present. So the police, the headquarters today, 240 Lincoln Street. This was different than in the old days. They used to be located out of the old market at 125 Pitt Street. So just like how the police force has changed over time, it's almost fitting that as they moved into this new era of policing, into the civil service, they also moved locations. So in 1961, a very, almost, again, something that you take for granted, identification tags for police, identification badges, was introduced into the Carlisle police force. So before then, while you might have known your officer, while he might have patrolled, there was no identification. So something we like to think about a lot in public history is the idea of material culture. So it's interesting to see that this material culture of the police, the identification badge, something that we associate so much with police today, really comes about so late almost in what we think about the history of policing in our community. One of the people that Chief Landis really stuck out to him and I was directed to look at a bit more was Chief Giordano. Chief Giordano. I'm from a small town in Kentucky, so my pronunciation of things isn't great. But one of the things that was really made clear to us is that the police force, while a civil bureaucracy, is also a organization of individuals. And these individuals leave their mark on the community, and they leave their mark on the history of the force. Chief Giordano served for the chief of police for 23 years. He did a number of reforms in the department, including effectiveness, strengthening bonds with the Carlisle community. He unfortunately passed away in 2010, but his impact on the department was clear to me in hearing people talk about him and reading about him. So I think it was really important to highlight that in the course of the project. One of the things that we unfortunately didn't get to do as much of because of the COVID situation was we were originally going to do oral history recordings with the police force. And I think there is just, I think there's a lot of potential for more oral history work to be done there. And I think it's a really great, I think it's really great that the Public History Department at Dickinson is making that connection, because even though you only can do an oral history for people alive today, later in the future, it's really valuable to hear that perspective of people. So my favorite development, I have 2 dogs of my own. So hearing that the K9 program in 1968, 2 originally, Hans and Thunder, and then Brutus. Obviously, I love dogs, and I think that Hans and Thunder are great names. But again, just another example of how the police force technology grows a lot with the community as well. K9 units are something that we see with police a lot, but it took till 1968 for them to implement it in the force. So just like how the police force has grown in a set of people, you know, the tools that they have used, whether it be cars or dogs, has also grown as well. So in 2016, the police force adopted the use of body cameras, again with the technology and the new challenges that this decade and this time brings us. This is a really important step. You know, body cameras is something that has been talked a lot about in the police force. So thinking about what is a recent development, what's something recently that the police force has done to kind of try to better connect with the community and to be more accountable, which is something that they didn't necessarily have to do in the 1800s. So thinking about how the police force has grown to be more responsive to the community as well and to be more accountable is something really important to think about when we look at the grand arc of the police history. And in 2017, Chief Chair Landis was sworn as the Chief of Police for Carlisle. You can see a photo up there, and I know he's on the call right now, so I don't want to talk about him too much, but I think it is important to note, given the recent situation and the current discussion around police, that the Chief Tara Landis is the first African-American chief of police for Carlisle. That's representation in the police force is something that is very important. And it was something that we heard from a lot of officers when we went and talked to them, that they really wanted the police force to reflect their community. So I did think it was important to note, even though it's something, a more recent development and almost something coming into the present, that that is a part of our current history. So this project was done not just by me, I put together the posters, but by the Dickinson Public History Department and the public history course. And I think it was a really great way to interact with the community. And I think that not only did I learn a lot, but I like the idea that we're contributing to the history of the community Carlisle gave so much to me over my 4 years. I don't know who I would be as a person without it. So it was great to have that perspective and be able to contribute to the history in that sort of way. Yeah, thank you. Um, I don't know if anyone has any questions, either about the project or about the history. I'd just like to say there's a little thing at the bottom. It was made in conjunction with all these different people, but I would like to single out Jeremy Ball, Dr. Jeremy Ball, the Cumberland County Historical Society, Lindsay Varner, and Kara Curtis, as well as Randy Watts, as people that really did help in collaborating with this project.